All right, everyone, there's a sort of hairy situation emerging in the Arabian Peninsula with the nation of Qatar, because right now it's kind of a weird interplay, actually. Apparently, the funding of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, as well as like some of the Al Jazeera broadcasts out of Qatar, have pissed off groups like the Saudi Arabians, the Egyptians, and so forth. Meanwhile, now there's a new development. Turkey is fast-tracking a couple of bills through that it wants to debate and propose to allow more troops to be sent to a base that they've got in the region, as well as to try to establish some sort of more peaceable situation in the region in regards to Qatar. Essentially, they want the Saudis and all these other groups to show restraint, not start bombing them or something. This, oddly enough, I don't know if people have noticed, this puts Turkey in line with Iran on the issue, not with the Western world. Now, when I say West, Egypt is more of an actual Western U.S. ally than the Saudi Arabians. The Saudi Arabians really are just a massive oil pump, and that's how they're seen by the U.S. as indispensable for energy purposes, otherwise not really dealing with them. Of course, if you read the less redacted version of the missing part of the 9/11 report, the Saudi Arabians were directly involved in financing 9/11. They're no allies of ours in any diplomatic or military sense, although everyone in D.C. pretends that that's the case. Egypt, though, is a solid Western ally. We almost lost them, actually, in that capacity. You have to understand, under Obama loved the Muslim Brotherhood too, and the Egyptians there, clearly, they got upset because the Muslim Brotherhood wanted Egypt to be the way that the FSA wants Syria to be, which is essentially a nationalistic Sharia state. As opposed to like ISIS wants a caliphate. They want to erase national borders, and they're actually kind of like Islamo-fascist globalists. They want expansionism, imperialism. They want the loss of sovereignty for nations that in some cases have been sovereign in their current form for some time. Egypt would be included in this total. Iran would be included, certainly within the same borders for many, many centuries, literally Persia, when you think about it, in everything except for name and religion. Of course, they're not worshipping the old Persian gods, unfortunately, anymore as they should, which could be why they have hardships, because their gods are frowning upon them. They've adopted Saudi Arabian gods instead, oddly enough. But Turkey is now in line with Iran on the issue of Qatar. They're sort of together in propping them up. Meanwhile, the Saudis, oddly enough, find themselves in agreement with Yemen, a nation which they are actively in a state of war in, as well as Egypt, which is sort of more Western. Turkey's part of NATO, but is leaning now towards, I guess, backing the Iranian side. This is a more dicey, I think, than people give it credit for. It's like they don't even want to talk about it. The news will talk about it, and all they're saying, like the corporate media, they say, oh yeah, well, these groups have blockaded Qatar. The Philippines have stopped sending workers there. Their planes can't really go anywhere because they're surrounded by the airspace and sea space of countries that now are blockading them. And Turkey gets involved and says, well, this isn't how things should be operating. They're like, Turkey and Iran have the level heads here. At the same time, I have to back the Egyptians on the Muslim Brotherhood issue and find it hilarious that the Saudis and Yemenis are in agreement, of all people. This is sort of like the kind of weird alliance that crosses religious and cultural and everything else boundaries, certainly political boundaries, that happened during World War I. This is a little bit, if this emerges into a shooting war, it's going to resemble World War I for the Middle East more than anything else, because all of these sides, you would think that this sort of rough alliance in diplomatic terms it's forming would be very, very malleable. When you've got a Sunni state like Turkey, loosely associating now on the diplomatic level with a Shia state, which is Iran, and with Qatar, the Saudis and Yemenis diplomatically agreeing while having their own fight. Egypt agreeing with the Saudi Arabians, despite the fact that some of their constant incursions with some of these groups, they come from the Wahhabi side, which is Saudi-funded. And then, of course, you've got Israel uninvolved as of yet. It'll be interesting to see what they say about the issue. They probably don't care so long as the Qataris get bombed, because they're sort of, Iran-leaning, At the same time, Turkey has propped up Palestine. The Saudis take a hands-off approach. The Egyptians actually are sort of in bed with the Israelis, like they have good relations with them. I look at it this way. It's hard for the United States diplomatically to do anything here. We can't risk the ire of Turkey because it's in NATO and it controls the Bosphorus. We can't risk the ire of Egypt because it is certainly Western aligned and controls the Suez Canal. As far as trade goes through the region, I'm sure the Europeans are very worried right now about what's happening. How are they going to get their ships through this general region? I realize that Qatar is on the other side of the Arabian Peninsula, but Egypt controls the Sinai. Turkey controls the Bosphorus. Makes no sense. Yeah, then Morocco gets involved. Who would they align with? And of course, this comes as part of a greater struggle over the Yemeni conflict and the Sunni Shia fighting in general, with Saudi Arabia aligned as well with Pakistan and Sudan, which is also regional, Pakistan having nuclear weapons. Meanwhile, Pakistan has its own problem with both China and India, a sort of a three-way problem. This could emerge into a much greater global conflict. I don't think it would affect the Americas. I mean, if we got involved at all, if they start shooting each other and we get involved at all, it will be probably on the side of both Egypt and Turkey, even if they're fighting one another, to try to prevent them from getting fucked. Now, just to maintain global trade, Europe would certainly have to get involved at that point. It wouldn't have a choice, especially over the Bosphorus, with trade with certainly Russia. Into the Black Sea. The Suez Canal is extremely important. It's second only to the Panama Canal in terms of traffic as far as these little locations go. So it would be a difficult situation for the West. I mean, we'd have to do something about it. Economically, a lot of trade would dry up if these two locations ended up getting curb stomped by the other side, so to speak. It'd be difficult. That would certainly get us involved if it allowed ISIS to proliferate. I would think if these countries began destabilizing one another, that's exactly what would happen. That would multiply the misery. No, the refugee crisis out of like Syria and parts of Iraq would look tiny by comparison. You wouldn't be talking about a few million refugees. You'd be talking about tens of millions probably. And they'd all go to Western Europe. Merkel would love to have them, essentially. We've got to stop that from happening. We should be leaning on all sides here to keep clear fucking heads and not start shooting one another, because that's the sort of thing that can happen. Some relatively small, innocuous, almost meaningless state like Qatar ends up spawning, a regional conflict that takes tens of millions of lives. I understand some people would be like, oh yeah, but this is like the Middle East, so it doesn't matter. It does as far as global trade is concerned. If only for that purpose, you should be very worried about this turning into an actual war. It'd be a lot bigger than just, the Syrian civil war / ISIS in Iraq and some problems in Libya. It would be way, way beyond that, and their misery would be multiplied too, because all these other countries that do occasionally get involved all of a sudden would have their own things to worry about. Russia would be trying to prop up Iran and at this point probably Turkey, while the United States also is trying to prop up the Turks while also propping up on the other side Egypt and Saudi Arabia. It would be a clusterfuck. It wouldn't probably lead to World War III so much as it would lead to the denigration of world trade and commerce, to the point at which most of the Western world would begin to fall into recession over the inability to move goods effectively across these zones, as well as energy. Oh yeah, the Venezuelans might like it because the oil price would climb. Of course, then the United States would start pumping more out of the ground and exploring more, and they'd still get screwed. So don't get too... Maduro shouldn't be too happy about the idea of those Middle Eastern regimes bombing one another, I suppose. They'd be a big problem for the entire world. It'd go well beyond... Think about it. Qatar, of all places. This one little tiny peninsula that's almost meaningless, all of a sudden gets fucked out of existence, and all of its neighbors start pit bombing one another, something like that. That's about all. Peace out.